Many of us are familiar with this scenario. You open your fridge to prepare for your next meal or snack, and although one or two of your food items are labeled as being past their expiry date, they still look right and smell right. And if there's a bit of mold, rot, or discoloration, it's only a little bit you can cut off. After all, these are your hard-earned pulas and tebes that you might be throwing into the bin after all. How about when you're running around town during a busy workday? And the most convenient way to get the closest thing to a home-cooked meal is from one of the many women who set up camp in malls and outside office parks. Do you ever stop to inquire or even think about where that food was prepared and stored, or even where it came from? Tonight we speak to consumer rights activist Kate and Richard Harriman to find out how we are faring as a nation. And later on in the program, we speak to restaurateur Gopalakrishnan Sridharan. In the United States, the federal government estimates that there are about 48 million cases of foodborne illnesses annually, the equivalent of 1 in 6 Americans each year. And each year, these illnesses result in an estimated 128,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths. In the UK, there are around 1 million cases of food poisoning every year, with a spike in numbers of around 120,000 extra cases during their summer months of June to August. A recent report from India detailed how riots erupted after 21 children died and 30 were left gravely ill after eating a free school lunch feared to contain poisonous chemicals. In big business, there have been some high-profile cases. Just last year, fast food giant KFC was ordered by an Australian judge to pay 8 million Australian dollars in compensation to the family of a young girl who was left paralyzed after contracting salmonella from a chicken wrap there in 2005. What is the extent of food poisoning in Botswana? And how well consumers are protected legally from food poisoning? Welcome back to First Issues, as we interrogate the policies aimed at protecting consumers when it comes to food safety, as well as the ways in which consumers can protect themselves. We started by asking our guests what laws are in place to protect consumers when it comes to purchasing food from supermarkets, stores, and restaurants.
We're actually very well protected in terms of legislation to help protect consumers regarding food safety. And not only do the consumer protection regulations cover us, but the specific regulations around public health. We have the Public Health Act, we've also got the Food Control Act, and also an act which governs the regulations when it comes to labelling of foods. So we've got the pre-packaged foods regulations, labelling of foods regulations.
How well are consumers aware of the laws in place? And has enough been done to educate them?
I think one of the problems for consumers is that we trust the stores to make sure they're selling food that's fit for the purpose and is of a good quality. And very few consumers actually do question things when they actually go shopping. You know, myself, when I go to a supermarket, I assume that the food that I put in my trolley is going to be safe to eat. And I don't think people do enough questioning. So there are things that customers can do to check products before they buy them to make sure they're going to be safe.
Food, this isn't just about food. It's exactly the same as when you have your car serviced, when you buy a computer or take your computer to be repaired. You rely on the service provider to know more than you do. We rely on a butcher to be an expert about meat and the storage of meat. We rely on the supermarket to know about these things. We can't be as skilled as they are. Most of us can't be. So we rely on them to have that knowledge and those skills, and also to adhere to the standards that exist. So we can't all be experts, but there are some things we can do to increase our knowledge and to protect ourselves a little bit more.
To what extent are consumers protected by these laws when they buy food from the thousands of street vendors in the hundreds of Botswana's streets? Taking into account that most of these street vendors are not legally registered as companies or even licensed to operate.
You go to your local council, because the local council actually have a legal obligation to make sure that vendors are licensed and that they're selling food that's fit for human consumption, basically. So if you ever have any queries about the quality of the food you're buying from a street vendor, go and see the local council, who can inspect, and they can actually seize the goods if they're not of good quality. And the public health regulations actually do govern the behaviour of street vendors. They have an obligation to make sure that they keep food in a safe environment, that they have clean utensils, and that they cook food in a satisfactory way.
The scariest case we probably heard about the provision of food and street vendors was a couple of years ago. We heard of a situation where food refuse was being stolen from a supermarket. Food that they'd thrown out at the end of the day for being past its expiry date or just not very good. They'd thrown it into the bins at the back of the supermarket. At night, thieves were breaking into that supermarket's refuse area, taking the meat from the skips and then selling it to street vendors to cook the following day. Now, you have no idea. This was in the summer as well, so this meat had been presumably rotting in the heat during the evening and was being served to people, covered in some spicy sauce the following day by street vendors. And food that's covered in a spicy sauce, you can't tell where it's been. You can't even taste this was chicken. You can't even taste the chicken because it's masked by the sauce they put on top of it. You have no idea of the level of infection, the levels of bacteria in that meat. We've no evidence that anyone died because of that, but I'd put money on people being seriously ill as a result of that. And you have no idea about that. You can't tell just by looking at a piece of meat where it's come from. It's terrifying. And this was street vendors, and they're at a particular high risk. Most restaurants you can go into, most of the spicy chicken restaurants you go into, you can see the food being prepared. There's a visibility there. Many restaurants do that. You can see into the kitchens. Some restaurants actually make a point of making it open so you can see. And that's great. I like that. I like the fact that you can see the food being prepared and you can see the levels of hygiene that are being demonstrated by the food preparation staff. Those sort of things are useful. Street vendors, it's a much higher risk. I'm sure most street vendors are very careful about what they do. Most of them, they know their living depends on it. They're not going to try and poison people. But where did they get the meat from? Did they buy it legitimately? Did they buy from a guy they met in a bar last night? We have no knowledge of that.
It's also more difficult to control the temperature of food. So if you're cooking at the side of the road, say, the food's out in the heat, and in summer in Botswana it's incredibly hot, and it's very difficult for a street vendor to actually control and keep food in a safe way. I think the point you raised about food safety, we know of incidences, for example, in South Africa last year, there was someone who died as a result of food poisoning from a street vendor. So it does happen, people do die from food poisoning.
If there's one thing that most consumers do religiously, it is passing by a grocery shop to buy something before heading home after a long day. This may be to buy some mopako for their children, a pint of milk for breakfast the next morning, or just for some stuff for the week. What should consumers look for when shopping?
I think, particularly with fresh foods, you need to check things like the expiry date or the sell-by date. And the labelling of prepackaged food regulations actually make it a requirement that when you buy something in a store that it actually has certain information. So, for example, the food must say what the ingredients are. It must show you the proportions of the ingredients in a product. It must also show you the date by which that product must be consumed. So either a sell-by date or a best before date, so that the consumer can actually see, and I've got an example here of a product where you can actually see it's got a sell-by date on the item, and then for the consumer they should use it by this date. So that's one of the key indicators. On fresh products, it's particularly important. So things like fresh meats that are packaged, or dairy products like eggs or milk or cheese, those are the important ones to look out for. A tin of baked beans, yes, you can get food poisoning from a tin of baked beans, but generally they have a longer shelf life, but it is still worth checking.
I think we also have to you have to use your brain. You have to be reasonable about these things. Things like meat and dairy products, they're the high-risk products. If you buy a bag of apples and it's a day after their sell by date, their use by date, it's fine. You can tell. You can look at an apple, you can feel it, you can see, is it okay? It's much harder with meat and with dairy products. If a can of baked beans is a day after its use by date, it's probably fine. Don't worry about it. And the important thing to note is that the regulations only cover packaged goods. So if you go into a supermarket and there's a big display of oranges or potatoes, there's no expiry date on those. But you use your brain, you use your hands, you use your nose. Look at an avocado, squeeze it. Smell it. Smell that orange. Smell the butternut. Does it look okay? Does it feel okay? And unfortunately, I think that's a skill that not all of us are taught. We have to learn sometimes the hard way, how to know when an avocado is ready to eat, how to know if an apple is looking good. That's quite easy, but some products you don't really know. So we should develop some skills to actually check these things ourselves.
I think the other thing to do is to look at the cleanliness of a supermarket. So if you walk into a supermarket and the floor's dirty and it's dusty and there's dust all over tins, that would suggest that that supermarket are not taking adequate care of the stock that they have available. Also, if you go to a fridge and the fridge isn't cold, that should be an alarm bell to you, because the fridge should be cold when you go to it. So we don't expect consumers to run around with thermometers to measure the temperature of fridges, but you can get a rough idea just by picking something up. Is it cold, or is something gone wrong?
I think the overlooked sense that we have is our sense of smell. There's a supermarket I don't go to often, but I've been to a few times, and they have a fish counter. And you can smell the fish counter from quite a way off. Now, one of the rules about fish is that fish shouldn't smell of fish. If fish smells of fish, it's gone off. It's bad. Fish should smell of just that clean sea air smell. That particular place, I wouldn't buy anything in that store, because if the fish counter is that putrid, I'm not going to buy fruit and veg from that place either, or indeed anything else. Use your sense of smell. And as Kate says, look around. Look at the quality of the hygiene. There's a restaurant we go to quite often, an Indian restaurant, where the owner will happily take you in his kitchen. He's proud of his kitchen. He's proud of his standards. He's proud of taking you in there and seeing the flames and the chefs doing their thing. He's proud of that. I'm not saying you should always ask to go into the kitchen, but maybe do that sometimes. Say to the owner, can I see your kitchen? Just because I'm interested. If they go, oh no, you know not to go there again. A decent restaurant owner will say, no problem, of course you can see my kitchen. He'll be proud of it.
What recourse do consumers have if they feel that they are not getting value for their money? If a customer walks into a restaurant, can he ask that he take a look at the kitchen to satisfy himself that where the food is being prepared meets the minimum requirements?
I don't think you have a legal right to do that, but you have a moral right to. I think you have a right to test an organisation. If you go and buy a computer from a store, you're entitled to say, tell me about the warranty. What will happen if this goes wrong? If you buy a cell phone, you're allowed to ask questions. If you go to a restaurant, you're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to say, what's your policy on cleanliness? How often do you clean your kitchen? How long does food last before it's served to me?
Those who have dared will tell you that most restaurants keep customers out of their kitchens, citing issues of policy. But Mr. Sridharan says that excuses of that nature hold no water with today's consumers. And he has chosen to have an open door policy at his place of operation.
My restaurant, this kitchen is always clean, and then I can sometimes some customers, they want to see my kitchen, I can take the customer inside the kitchen. That guts I got, because my kitchen is always clean.
What are some of the bad practices regarding hygiene that some restaurants practice?
Hygiene, definitely must maintain the restaurant clean and nice, because the kitchen, because we are using a food things, a lot of cockroach and things like that, it is unhealthy for the customer. We must use the pest control. They must come and clean every month. They must do the pest, all the, what do you call it, chocolate or something like that, putting all over the restaurant. So in that case, you must away from the cockroach. And then we got a fly catcher. They can put the fly catcher, ultraviolet one. We can use that one to protect the flies, because it's unhealthy to fly comes and sit on the meat or something like that. It will produce maggot and everything. That is not good for the health, and then people get diarrhea, things like the food poisoning. Better we can maintain the pest control, guys.
What actions are taken to specifically prevent food poisoning in commercial kitchens?
In the council side, all the food handlers, they must go for the blood test and all type of tests. Then only they can give the license to us. So without medical, every year we do the medical test, because the chef the nail must be cut nicely. There's no nail on their fingers. It should be clean and nice. When they're cooking, they must wash their hand, they cook nicely. We can't use funny way to cook. Then you can get diarrhea and food poisoning, definitely yes. They check the amoeba they test a lot of things. Blood test, and then the cough, and then even the motion test, everything they do in their lab. So those are amoebas. Once amoeba comes, the customer get problem with the diarrhea and things like that. So that is, they must maintain that one. They must wear the cap when they're cooking. They should not fall the air or something like that. Always must keep the chef neat and clean, even all the food handlers inside the kitchen. In our restaurant, we never use that frozen vegetables. We use always fresh vegetable. They boil every day. You can see they're cooking right now in the kitchen. They cook every day. Everything is fresh. So that's why you must maintain the quality of the food, and at the same time it's a healthy food, not to the customer. Anything will happen for the food poisoning side.
Time and again you walk into a shop and find a pile of stuff with a big sign, special. We are informed that in almost all these cases, these special offers are for a reason that benefits the supplier. And in most cases, it is because the shop want to get rid of the stock because it is just about to expire. Is this not one form of exploiting consumers, taking into account that these shops will not divulge all the information to allow the consumer to make an informed decision?
I think you have a point. I think the store would say, look, we've discounted them because it's coming to the end of their shelf life. So, for example, if a packet of biscuits on special and it's got a week left to run, it might be worth the consumer, if you know you're going to eat that packet of biscuits in the next couple of days, to buy it on special. But I think the point is they don't make it obvious to the customer that's why it's on special. You think it's a bargain. And I've actually fallen victim to this myself. I've been out and bought biscuits, got them home and realised actually, oh, the expiry date's in 2 days' time, I shouldn't have bought those because I don't actually want to use them for another week.
A sensible store will use that information. They make it clear. They'll say, look, we have this meat, the sell by date is today, so we're discounting it. But don't forget, you must eat this today, or within the next whatever the period is. A sensible store would do that, and we'd like them more. We'd respect them for that, because they're not trying to pull a fast one, they're not trying to con us, they're not trying to kill us. They're trying to get rid of stock that has to be eaten today. Big sign saying, you must use this within the next 24 hours or 48 hours. We'd respect them for that. And we'd like a bargain. And there's nothing wrong with that. That would be a good thing for a store to do, rather than try and deceive us by saying, oh, it's a special. No, just be honest with us and we'll like you more and we'll give you more money.
And it is actually an offence under the Food Control Act to sell goods that have expired. So they should, if you go into a store and the sell-by dates or the use-by date is today, I certainly would be saying to the store, yes, you can sell it, but I want a discount for it because I have to eat it today. It's not fit for the purpose tomorrow.
And if you do see things where where they have gone past the sell-by date, you need to say to the store, excuse me, fix this. I mean, I've seen that done. Our son, our 14-year-old, did that in a store recently. He noticed something had expired, and I pointed out to the cashier, and she went, remove it all. And hopefully it was all disposed of. It wasn't put back on with a different sell-by date.
Look for the cleanliness of a restaurant. If you walk in and you see staff with dirty uniforms and they don't look clean, that's an indicator of poor hygiene standards in that restaurant.
Check their fingernails. I expect a waiter to have clean fingernails. Because if they have dirty fingernails, what else is dirty? It's not good.
You might sit at a table that hasn't been wiped, but ask the waiter to actually bring a cloth and wipe the table. But look at the general environment, look at the crockery that they use. Is the plate that they bring clean? Now, there is regulation around how food is served in a restaurant. For example, a waiter may not put their hands on, obviously, on the part of the knife and fork that you're going to put in your mouth. They have to hold it by the handle. So there are certain rules around how they present food to you, how they hold a plate before they hand it over to you.
Crockery can't be chipped, and they mustn't touch the rim of a glass. That's why most times, the straw, they leave the little bit of paper on top of the straw. That's good, because you don't want someone's dirty fingernails all over the thing you're going to stick in your mouth. But even it's very specific about no chipped plates, because that's where bacteria can breed.
But also, again, check things like the heat of the food. If someone brings you food and it's not hot, that's an indication that something's gone wrong in the kitchen.
Or it's the leftovers from the previous customer that hasn't come to pick it up. You don't know.
What are the risks of buying food that has been badly cooked or that has simply gone bad?
There's lots of different types of food poisoning. One of the most common ones is salmonella food poisoning, which you get from eating infected chicken. So chicken that has the salmonella bacteria on it that hasn't been destroyed through cooking. But salmonella also exists in things like eggs, dairy products, other meat products. So cooking of chicken and the way that you sell chicken in a store is really important. I went to a supermarket a few years ago and I was doing a specific test on food safety. And I bought a chicken and I'd picked it up and I realised that it was part frozen. They were selling it as a fresh chicken. Now, one of the rules about chicken is you don't refreeze chicken. And I always buy chicken to put at home in the freezer to keep for another day. Had I gone to that supermarket 2 or 3 hours later, I would never have known that it had been frozen already, because it would have defrosted by then. So that's a real risk for a consumer as well, is malpractice by stores as well as restaurants.
I think decent stores, they do train their staff on this, because they can be inspected. I mean, the local authority, local council can go around and do inspections, and they can send staff for medical checks. They can test things. They can take samples.
And they do that, and they do that as part of their licensing requirements as well.
And a decent restaurant will do that, and a restaurant who will show you their kitchen is the sort of restaurant that will be doing that. But I think it's clear that a number of outlets are not doing that. You can tell from the standards of hygiene. There was a situation reported to us years ago of a restaurant where a rat was seen running through the restaurant during a mealtime. And the person complained, what's going on? And she was shown that there was rat poison around the edge of the kitchen. So they're preparing food in a kitchen full of rat poison. It's just not good. I think you can judge that restaurant. We've never been back since. Apparently the food's very good, but if you survive.
We trust that from now on you will be a little more careful about what it is you ingest. From me, Nameto Sibina, the team behind First Issues, our sponsors First National Bank, we wish you a good night and pleasant viewing.